Mr. Fadhil, are you there?
Yes, yes. Sorry
Okay,
for the delay. I just finished a meeting.
no problem. Okay,
Yeah, thank
so
you.
I think we can start. Is that okay with everyone? Um,
Sure.
yeah, Professor,
Yep, yeah, I'm here.
yeah, you all can turn on the camera. I mean, I meant the speakers. Okay, so let's start. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for patiently waiting. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, Too Costly to Keep, Too Risky to Cut, Malaysia Economic Reform Meets Trump's 25% Tariff and Global Instability. My name is Tharasini Sundarajan, and it's my pleasure to moderate this critical discussion. Currently, Malaysia is at a crucial economic juncture. As the country moves towards implementing targeted subsidies for fuel, especially RON 95, we now face significant geopolitical uncertainty due to President Trump's recent proposals and broader global instability. Trump's proposed reciprocal tariffs, exemplified by now a 25% tariff on Malaysian exports, underscore broader concerns around protectionism, trade conflicts, and unpredictable foreign policies. These developments put Malaysia in a precarious position, potentially impacting our ability to execute necessary subsidy reforms effectively. To contextualize, the 25% reciprocal tariff by Trump could affect key Malaysian exports such as E&E products, palm oil-based goods, and scientific instruments, threatening over 13% of Malaysia's export market and could put up to 50,000 local jobs at risk. In 2022 alone, blanket fuel subsidies surged to 45.2 billion ringgit, with only 6.8 billion ringgit, just 15% benefiting the B40 income group. The remaining 85% disproportionately went to the M40, T20, and foreign users, revealing significant inefficiency and inequity. Tonight, we'll unpack what this means economically and socially, assess the resilience of our subsidy reform strategy, and explore targeted safety nets to mitigate these impacts. We'll now hear from our distinguished speakers for a panel discussion and then later open the floor up for questions. Before we start, let me briefly introduce our speakers. Firstly, we have Professor Dr. Wong Chin-Yoong. He's currently an economics professor at University Tunku Abdul Rahman, Utah. He also hosts the ATV program and is a former external consultant for TNB, Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh, and Malaysian Institute of Economic Research, MIER. Next, we have Mr. Fadhil Rahman, a senior research officer at Merdeka Center. He is a YCLE professional fellow from the Department of State, US, and is a current fellow to the Texas State Representative J.M. Lozano. And last but not least, we have Mr. Woon King Chai, a director in Institute of Strategic Analysis and Policy Research, INSAP. He's also a former acting general manager of Agribusiness Division, East Coast Economic Region Development Council. Let's give up our hands for all these wonderful speakers. All right. Okay. So now let's start with our discussion. Our first question is directed to all speakers. So our first question would be, US President Donald Trump has proposed a 25% tariff on Malaysian exports, citing the bilateral trade deficit and alleged transshipment loopholes. In your view, how credible is this threat? Maybe Mr. Fadil Rahman, you could start off with this question.
Okay, thank you, Dashni. I think from my view, I'm not economist by training, so maybe I can let Professor Wong or Mr. Chai to share more on that. But I'd like to just highlight the fact that we have been facing this geopolitical uncertainty for the longest period of time, particularly since Trump's first administration back in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So even back then, we have had a lot of confrontation, a lot of trade war between US and China, and we had a lot of conflicts brewing after COVID. And to me, this threat is not just about economics per se, it's more or less about power. It's more or less about resetting the global order. And I think perhaps by inciting chaos, as what we are seeing right now, this is a way for America to reassert itself as a dominant power and come up as a better competitor to other, well-known powers such as Russia and China. So talking about the credibility of this threat, I think of course in terms of implementation, it remains to be seen because at this point in time it's still being discussed. However, I see this as a way for America and particularly for Donald Trump to showcase his power and also to threaten some of the countries involved, since when we're talking about tariffs, most of the countries involved are developing countries, and this is a way for him to reset or reorientate how we are seeing this world. So that's my point for now.
I see. That's an interesting take.
Mhm.
What about Prof. Wong? What do you think?
Hmm. There are a couple of facts I believe that we probably can establish based on what has been happening so far. Number one, we used to believe that when that 10% baseline tariff was implemented or went into effect on the 5th of April, so we thought that that 10% was the worst scenario, right? The best scenario, so to speak. But then when Vietnam struck the first deal before the announcement on the last Monday about the new reciprocal tariff, then it turns out that 20% becomes the baseline tariff. You know, with the condition of Vietnam giving up all or satisfying all the demands from the United States counterparts, including zero tariff on U.S. exports, probably tearing down all the non-tariff barriers as well. So that becomes, which means that if you successfully strike a deal with the United States, so 20% or somewhere around that will be the best you can get. Of course, in return for the United States of everything being abolished. Now, so that will be therefore the best scenario we probably will have to bear in mind. So, which means that if we expect our government to also strike a deal like the case of Vietnam, like the case of Indonesia, then that 20% plus, giving up all the demands or satisfying all the demands for the United States will be the one that we have to swallow, we have to accept. So, is that the road that we want to take? So that's the number one. Number two, does it mean that it will be the end of the chaos? I don't think so. So, which means that even if we strike a deal, but that will not be the end game of this tariff saga. So it will continue as long as Trump believes or Trump thinks it's convenient for him to keep provoke this tariff upon other reasons, Fadhil mentioned just now, for political reasons, either for internal political reason or because to push for the to reorganize the global economic order, or because to push forward his far right ideology abroad, so on and so forth. So it has to be something to do with domestic policy in the United States. So and we already have that kind of incidents before. Even if Trump has struck a deal with anyone, then when he thinks it's convenient for him, then he can just like renege whatever he has promised, and then things will go over again. So I believe this will be the case as well. So that will be second fact we probably can establish. The third will be that 25% that we are facing right now may not be the worst scenario that in front of us. But moving forward, I believe that industry specific tariff will probably hit our economy worse if it is going into effect. What do you mean by the industry specific tariff? You remember that Trump also instructed the Department of Commerce, to launch, or the U.S. trade representatives to launch investigation upon based on the Section 201 as well as 323. That's about national security, to launch investigations on pharmaceutical industries, on E&E industries, semiconductor industries, and then the report probably will come out by the end of July, and then actions will be taken by the beginning of August. So since our exports to United States are mainly concentrated in semiconductor, in electrical machineries, in E&E parts and components, for example, so that it's going to hurt our economy more than that 25%. So that will be another third that we probably can think about. Number four, I believe that many will have thought that, because Indonesia and Vietnam now, they will have this tariff lower than Malaysia, then we probably will lose our competitiveness, so on and so forth. Just don't forget that whatever deals strike between Indonesia, for example, with the United States, by allowing, for example, zero tariff for UX goods into Indonesian market, as long as Indonesia, Malaysia, for example, we are still the WTO members, we still adhere to the most favored nation rules. So whatever zero tariff given to UX goods entering the Indonesian market will be extended for Malaysian exports into Indonesian market as well. So that basically, in a way, mitigate or moderate the negative impact that we have, because of higher tariff into the US markets. Because that means we are able to enjoy, even we are not in the deal, but we're able to enjoy that zero tariff given to your US counterparts into Indonesia, into Vietnam, into other trading partners, which will probably strike deals with the United States later on to have a probably better tariff. So we are able to take advantage on that as well. So that in a way will mitigate, like I said, the adverse impact of the US tariff on our exports, because now we can export our products to different markets as well. So these are the facts so far. I believe that we can bear in mind, but I have to remind everyone that everything is in fluid. So things can change by tomorrow.
I see. Yeah, it is true though. Initially it was 24% and then it became 25% in a few weeks. So who knows what might happen in the future. Well, thank you very much for that interesting take as well, Prof. Wong. Now, what about you, Casey? What do you think?
Right. Thank you, Tharasini, and thanks for having me. I think as the other panelists, Prof. Wong and Fadhil has alluded to, we're dealing in a situation where it's not so much about the economics as well, where it's about projection of power and a reordering of global trade. And I think if you look at how policies are made by Trump and how he's responded to the current situation, we are going from day to day, right? Things can change overnight. A sudden pause, a sudden announcement of moratorium, or a sudden imposition of extra tariffs, it just appears as if we cannot completely rely on what we think we know, how he might respond. So I believe all the countries affected, especially Malaysia, we just have to do our own thing. We have to crack on with our own economic planning and implementation of our own programs, help our industries to diversify and break into other markets to mitigate the impact from these tariffs, right? And as Prof. Wong said, I mean, the 10% baseline tariff essentially has been in place since April, right? How much has that impacted the export of Malaysian goods to the US market? I don't believe we have had much clear data. And then what remains to be seen is its implication to our local industry and how quickly are we able to close the gap. Because when you impose tariffs on goods, people might choose other goods that are cheaper, right? Thus reducing demand on your own goods. So what are our industries doing in terms of diversifying its customer base? So there's all these things happening, and whether these tariffs are applied correctly or not, what the codes say, I think there's very little information out there as well. So a lot of people, I think when we talk about this, we're actually just talking on assuming its impact, trying to make our best guesses. But the reality is we can only do the best that we can, right? That's all. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Casey. Yeah. Speaking of doing our best, I think we could talk a bit about how exactly has Malaysia performed in this situation. So basically, do you consider the 25% tariff as a result of a negotiation failure on Malaysia's part? And what do you believe is Trump's underlying motivation for targeting Malaysia with this tariff? Previously, you did mention that it's a power move and stuff, but what do you think you could expand more on it? And what do you think is the bargaining chips or strategies could Malaysia leverage to reduce or neutralize the proposed trade?
Me?
Yeah, Mr. Casey, you could just begin, I
Right.
guess.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you recall, the US Trade Representative released a report shortly after the first round of tariffs were first announced, the 24% on Malaysia. And one of the key issues highlighted were NTBs, or non-tariff barriers, which they claim Malaysia has a lot of protected industries such as agriculture, automobile. I think there were several. Energy. I believe they highlighted a few sectors where they claim Malaysia has imposed non-tariff barriers that were not good to the United States, and that was among the justification lah for the reciprocal tariffs imposed. And I think when we want to say, oh yeah, is then a 25% tariff a result of negotiation failure? I think we have to be fair to the government, because there's also very little transparency about what has actually happened. I mean, we know that we have sent delegation led by the minister to the US, but what were the conversations and meetings held between the Malaysian and the United States trade representative? I think a lot of that, I mean, as they say, right, negotiations were pretty much kept under wraps. And however, there would be also actions that raised a lot of questions as well. You know, how during this period, Malaysia also sidled up to BRICS in the recent BRICS summit, where President Trump said anyone who aligns themselves to anti-American policies will see an additional 10% levied. So what then, is 25% just a start, and we're looking at an eventual 35% tariff? I mean, the numbers can just blow up, right? And if you look at the letters issued by Trump to the Prime Minister and the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, it's honestly a copy and paste job, right? So it's really just change of numbers and the recipient. So I don't know how much we should be reading into it. I feel like if we spend too much time trying to understand it, we may just be wasting resources, and rather we should focus on taking actions that are meaningful to the economy, to our economy and our businesses, and to keep our industries competitive in the global market.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Prof, maybe you could add on to that.
I agree with what Casey has mentioned. Don't read too much into the intention of, or what's really behind the curtain of this tariff stuff. You know, what's behind Trump's consideration, you know, why to impose this tariff, why this calculation, because it basically moved from how ridiculous it was, you know, on 2nd of April, the Liberation Day, when Trump's announced that the reciprocal tariff based on that calculations, and then people later on found out that it was something computed through, you know, that you can get from AI, from ChatGPT, so on and so forth, without any economic basis or fundamentals in that. Two, the recent letters, you know, like what Casey mentioned, is basically a copy and paste job. And even even he mentioned about, like, for example, the BRICS. Don't forget that Indonesia, it's officially the member of BRICS, not even Malaysia, but still, you know, you will get Indonesia having something, you know, the tariff better than Malaysia. Even for the case of Brazil, it has nothing to do with economics at all. It is all about political reason, you know, to save his buddy, the former president of Brazil. So in that sense, I therefore believe that, and I believe that reason will keep changing. So on the 1st of August, you know, when that new deadline, when the deadline comes, I believe that it will be extended for another deadlines. And you can see that from when those letters were sent out, you can judge that from how the stock markets in the United States reacted. So they basically didn't, they didn't take all these threats seriously at all, because the market believes these taco things. You know, Trump's always chickens out stuff, and I believe that Trump's know that having that 20% on average tariff US have against the world, the highest ever since 100 years ago, since the Small-Holly Tariff Act in 1929. So it is going to hurt US the most, to this because of inflation problems, so on and so forth. So, and I believe that Trump knows this, and I don't think that he will go into that scenario, judging from how he reacted on the 9th of April when the reciprocal tariff, remember, was implemented. It went into effective on 9th of April, and then it was being put into pause for 90 days at about like 1 o'clock in the noontime because of how the bonds market and stock market reacted on that. So he knew about the economic impact of if he really made this tariff threat serious. So because of that, therefore, like I said, we no need to read too seriously into all these things, and it always will be extended, so we will never be able to see the end game so far based on what has been going on. But having that said, I believe that we still have to at least show good faith to keep negotiating with the US counterparts, not because with the hope to strike any best deal from US, but at least to fix that 25% as our worst case, nothing to be worse than that 25%. So any achievement that any deal we can strike later on will be an achievement, from that 25%. So that will be, what I believe we can do in the road ahead.
Thank you so much, Prof. Wong. So I've noticed a pattern about whether we are foreseeing whether Trump would maintain this consistent tariff or whether he would keep increasing. What do you think about that, Mr. Fadhil? Do you foresee Trump maintaining a consistent tariff over time, or is this likely to change? And also, what would be the broader implications for the global economy if high import tariffs are sustained?
In my point of view, I would agree with what was mentioned just now. I feel like the tariff rate will be very volatile, in the sense that it will change from time to time. And in terms of implementation, there's no real clarity. And I think from what we have seen over the past few weeks or so, when countries negotiate with US over tariff, there is this possibility of them being forced to accept certain concessions from the US. For instance, in the case of Indonesia today, you can see that the tariff rate was reduced to 19%. However, some deals were made in terms of how US mentioned that Indonesia would have to accept or have to agree to certain energy deals, agricultural products, as well as purchase of I think about 20 to 50 Boeing planes. So this is something that we really have to be concerned about. And I think our government has taken the right step by not being put in that kind of position and willing to negotiate even more. Also, on this note, I believe that our government has taken the right step again by diversifying our trade strategy, looking for new markets, and also attempting to craft better industrial policies in the country. So I think over the past few years, our Prime Minister and also the government has launched a few blueprints, a few strategy papers that would guide our industrial development in targeted sectors such as semiconductor, energy transition, whatnot. And I think this is a good way for us to start. Also on this particular note, I think the other point that I'd like to highlight is the fact that we need to also look at the way we form up or develop our young talents here in Malaysia in terms of skilled workers and so on, because this is another area that require much attention, I think, over the next few years as we seek to improve the quality of our workforce. And I think in doing this, we need a better whole of government, whole of society kind of approach where we work closely with industries, with education institutions, whatnot. So I think this would be my point for now on this particular topic.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fadhil. I can see that you provided a lot of context in different scenarios, and that was really helpful as well. Thank you so much. Moving on, this question is for Prof. Wong. As you mentioned earlier, that the tariff imposed by US would primarily affect American consumers as they did previously during the stock market exchange and everything. Then, in this case, why then should Malaysia be concerned? And if it does materialize, how might these tariffs specifically impact Malaysia's fiscal sustainability, and its ability to proceed with subsidy reforms.
All right. So, I mean, why does it matter for Malaysia? Because we sell our products to US. All right. So it is not so much you let's make it clear when we engage in international trade. So the main purpose of trade is to buy rather than to sell. The effort to export, it's with the purpose so that we can gain more from the consumption of all these imported goods, at cheaper price with better quality and more varieties, for example. So therefore, it is, of course, the right step, number one, for a small open economy like this, which we have no power to influence the world prices, to maintain our strategy not to retaliate against this tariff, right, against us. So and that move basically in a way shield us from this US tariff, at least those not related to export sector, particularly Malaysian consumers. So that's number one. So in that sense, by not taking that retaliatory measure, so we shield our economy partly from that US tariff. That's number one. Number two, but in a way, we still have to export in order to be able to buy things that we want from the world. So the export sector, particularly those to the US market, of course, will be affected by this tariff because of more expensive export prices, and therefore the demand may be diverted away to other countries' exports, or because of the uncertainty instigated by this stop and go tariff incident. So that uncertainty itself will put the US buyers into hesitation whether to take the orders or not. So that itself, of course, will have impact on our exporters, and therefore you can imagine all the subsequent stories. All the productions will be affected, and it will affect the employment, so on and so forth. So those will be the stories that therefore we have to take care about. When we deal with this US tariff, how to minimize. So the question is that how to minimize the impact of this tariff uncertainty on our economy, particularly the export sector. So the first one, like I said, by not retaliating, so we shield our domestic economy from that issues, from the problems. And when it comes to export sector, now there are multiple directions we can go. First, for example, if you look at the major Malaysian exports to US market, they are basically all concentrated in six largest categories, which include the semiconductor, integrated circuit IC, then petroleum, particularly the crude and the refined petroleum, as well as the gas, and then some of the electrical machineries. So those six sectors already account for about 70% of Malaysian exports to United States. So if we really want to, like, for example, moderate the impact, so you notice that those are the business run by MNCs, run by GLCs. So of course it would have impact, but you would therefore notice the impact are not symmetrical. So majority of SMEs, they are not in the exporting business. So again, in that sense, it doesn't affect our business too much. Okay, so I'm, of course, by saying that, I'm talking about in aggregate. For certain industry like furniture, for example, they certainly will be hit the hardest, given the fact that you have like 70%, 60 to 70% of their exports are meant for US markets. Of course, they will be hit harder. So therefore, it goes to the third things that the government can do. It's on how to mitigate this impact is to, like, for example, the government, the ministry must closely, talk with our industry's players, different associations, different business associations, different business partners, so that we can have the spontaneous or the real-time assessments about the impact of this tariff on our business, and therefore come up with different fiscal assistance, different package in order to help them to minimize the pain and go through these incidents. And of course, by then, the government can do so much more in order to mitigate that pain, including, like, for example, like I said just now, even other trading partners, they have struck a deal better than us with the United States. That shouldn't be something that we should worry too much. After all, 25% versus 20%, it is not that the kind of big difference that will make our FDIs will relocate, spend tens of millions to decide to relocate the factories out from Malaysia and to those countries and export from there. So 5% will not be the reason or the driving factor for all these things to happen. But at the same time, like I said, because of the most favored nation status, so it basically opened up the market for our SMEs, for our exporters, for our potential exporters to explore new markets. The markets that also enjoy zero tariff into all these different countries because of this MFN status following the trade deal between respective countries within the United States. So it opens up opportunities. So on how to grab those opportunities, to turn the threats into opportunities will be something that the government can do together with our industries. So having all this being done, so like I said, they are to mitigate the negative impact of tariff on an economy. So that shall therefore lay a better foundation for whatever reforms you want to do domestically. Because you cannot push reforms always bring pains, all right? So people like to say no pain, no gains. But sometimes even with pains, then people have no gains. So that's not the guaranteed thing. So if reform instigate pains, and you therefore need an economic environment where the business players, the society, they can endure the pains, while waiting for the fruits or the benefits of the reform, to be reaped in the future. So in order to do that, like I said, therefore we must have, steps, measures on how to make the economic environment more conducive, more favorable for the reform. Especially when you talk about so many reforms that we in lining up to be put on the table and to be put into effective in months to come. From raw 95 subsidies rationalization is certainly one of them. So and we know the past histories of fuel subsidies. So first of all, it's just nothing new. We have this initiative to rationalize subsidies since Najib's era, probably since Badawi, when before the elections in 2008. But then it was being implemented by Najib administration, during Najib administration. So it has been there for 10 years. Now, since we have that 10 years, more than 10 years of effort, of experience in rolling out these fuel subsidy reform, then there are a couple of things that probably we must put in mind, in order how to make it more effective or less resistant. Number one, it has to be in a better economic environment, an environment where people have the financial capabilities to withstand any pains because of this reform. Don't forget that even though, Dari, you mentioned just now at the beginning of our talk, you mentioned that, all right, so you have what? Majority of this field is enjoyed by M40, T20, so very small percentage for enjoyed only by B40. But don't forget that the so-called M40, if you look at our median salary enjoyed by or gained by our by Malaysian employees, median salary means, though, if you arrange from the lowest monthly salary earners all the way until the 50th, those in the middle. So in last year December, the median monthly salary is just about 3,000. So that already covers 50% of our working population. So you go from 50% to 60th to 70th, that probably go up from 3,000 to 4,000, 5,000. Now you're talking about taking away the fuel subsidies even for those who are earning 3,000. Those who are earning 3,500 because they are in the category of M40, they are not in the category of B40. But do you think that they are financially capable to afford taking out all the raw 95 subsidies and all go to raw 97? So that will be something that is the root of why people resist fuel subsidy reform so much. So that's number one, how to make sure that we have a better economic environment for people to be able to accept that one. Okay. And the second thing is the reason of this raw 95 fuel subsidy reform. I don't believe that people will still buy the idea that it is because of the fiscal consolidation. We have that field reform 10, 15 years ago, but still by today, we still talk about that fiscal consolidation problems. We still talk about deficit problems. We talk about debt problems. So which means that the field subsidy reform itself is not sufficient to overcome the debt issues that that has been troubled us for so long. So if you keep using the same excuse or reason that has been used for 15 years and we're still using that, I don't think that the marginal effect of this excuse will still be there. So we gotta come up with a better, reason for this reform. And I don't think that separating between Mahakaya and those B40 is a good way to do so. We have already so many cleavage in Malaysia along ethnic lines, along urban-rural lines. Now we still want to create that class cleavage between the Mahakaya and the B40. So I don't think that's a good way. So then we should come up with a better reason. So yeah, that's how we can view this tariff stuff along with our reform domestically.
That was a really funny and interesting take on the subsidy reforms. I really enjoyed it. And speaking of public how does public accept the subsidy reforms? How do you think that Malaysia should time and communicate its RON 95 subsidy reform to avoid worsening inflation or triggering public backlash? Maybe Mr. Casey Woon, you could talk along these lines.
I mean, I think communication is something that every time a new government policy is introduced, everyone will say, so last minute, not being communicated properly. I think since time immemorial, this has always been the issue. And I can understand, why a lot of things were done at the very last minute to minimize its impact on the economy, on the stock market, on perception. So I feel like what the government really needs to do is like Prof. Wong said, right? We have enough divisions, and if we rush into things without proper understanding of the issues, you just end up creating more divisions over nothing while creating all the problems at the same time, right? So with this whole subsidy rationalization, while it's something that many administrations have taken place of, I think we must not lose sight of why it is needed, right? Basically, the government is just trying to raise its revenue. It needs more revenue to come in so they have more money to spend, whether be it for social economic activities or to fund ministry initiatives and projects. And regardless the reasons, right? Every government and every administration have their own plans and initiatives that they want to implement. But the ultimate objective is still to raise revenue from, the rakyat, right? And the simplest form is through taxation. Now, INSAP's position in this matter is we understand the need for the government to fund its initiatives. No arguments there, but our issue is the fact that there are so many other ways to do this, right? Why are we choosing to go with, for example, expansion of SST, right? That is definitely more opaque and less transparent. We have an alternative, right? GST, which had been abolished due to political expediency back in 2018. That's definitely more transparent. Whether people say, GST taxes everything, erases, it's more efficient form of tax, therefore the revenue it taxes from the people are greater. And it is true, if you look at research, even from RHB, right, it is pointed out that they calculated, they roughly estimated that the revenue that they anticipate to generate from GST would be far more than what SST, even with expansion, would be able to generate. But the difference is this, right? Why GST is more efficient? It is because it will tax those who consume more. Whereas SST its impact is far broader. In fact, far more products and goods are being taxed under the SST, under its expanded regime. So a lot of this, I think, in many ways, the government is unable to communicate it because, I mean, if you really go into the issues, it becomes very clear. Or even the implementation of e-invoicing, right? What is its purpose? It is to ensure that businesses are not able to run away from paying their taxes by hiding their profits, right? So, because with e-invoicing, every transactions are recorded, right? So there's no way that you can run away from it. So we're coming with all these policies just to raise revenue, right? Complicating things, and every layer that you add on is additional costs, right, to businesses that have to manage and have to implement. So why not just return to what we've had all this while, the GST, right? Systems are already in place. So rather than trying to flog a dead horse and force ourselves into a position that's just and that be more and more convoluted, I think the government really needs to rethink its approach. And as Prof. Wong pointed out, it's also about the rakyat's income being able to match with what the government is trying to extract from us, right? I mean, there's only so much that people are able to give until it is hitting directly upon their livelihoods, and I think it would not be fair for everyone to bear the same burden. I think the government should also bear part of this burden. Don't just think about levying taxes on the public in order to fund your own programs. I think the government should look at themselves, look at where monies can be saved, look at how they can optimize their spending, look at issues of overlaps between functions of government agencies and ministries. There are all these issues that needs to be looked at first and should be looked at first before looking to the rakyat as a source of revenue.
Hey, thank you so much, Mr. Casey. That was a really, really insightful approach as well. Since Prof. Wong and also Mr. Casey has talked about Malaysia's government's communication and like how government has been able to approve this subsidy reforms and everything, Mr. Fadhil, recent polls show Prime Minister Anwar has a 55% approval rating. However, like as they mentioned before, targeted subsidies are often unpopular, especially in this time period. So how do you think this reform might test the government's support base? And do you think that this 55% rating is a positive indicator for Anwar's political future? Mr. Fadhil, this question is for you.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Sorry, my line is a bit choppy. So
Okay.
based on what you mentioned about Prime Minister Anwar's approval rating at 55%. So generally speaking, from what we have tracked at Merdeka Center since he was first chosen as our leader, his approval rating has always been somewhat consistent, about 50 to about 55, close to 60% at one time. So initially, his policy direction was very much appreciated with ideas of reform and whatnot. But the issue right now is about implementation. So I would agree with what Mr. Casey and what Professor Wong has mentioned just now when it comes to government communication and so on. So for this targeted subsidy, I think it's going to be a bit of a problem, not just because of its implementation. I think that was already discussed in length just now, but I would just like to take the audience here to look at the broader perspective and also from an administrative standpoint. So the issue that we are having right now is the fact that a lot of people, they don't really feel the benefit of targeted subsidy. They don't really think that it provides them any direct benefit, and particularly those coming from the middle income group. And I think this is largely due to, as what was mentioned just now, ineffective communication strategy, lack of coordination, last minute planning, whatnot. But I think this has been a running issue for the current administration, and it has not been well managed. The other point is about, in terms of savings, when you talk about targeted subsidy, like last year we have had diesel subsidy restructuring exercise, in which the second finance minister noted that we were able to save about 8 billion ringgit in total, which was about 4 billion ringgit higher than what was projected. The issue with rakyat is that they don't really see where does the additional savings go to. If you look at the national budget, that was stable over the past 2 or 3 years, we have seen basically bigger numbers presented over time. I think for last year, it was about 400 billion ringgit that was supposed to be spent for this year. But if you look at the breakdown, it's mostly gone to the operational side of things, meaning to say how to use the funds for government internal operations to pay salaries, whatnot. Only 30 or 35% of our budget is used for development initiatives and programs. So when the public don't really get to see the benefit of all these initiatives, then they would question the effectiveness of the government plan. That's one. The other issue is about how the government, particularly the top leaders, are communicating their effect from policy reforms as well as potential investments. I think this was discussed in length over the past 1 or 2 months, in which some people have compiled the figure related to potential investments coming from abroad, noted to be about 500 billion ringgit or 600 billion ringgit. However, for the regular public, they would like to see some progress, how it affects their salaries, how it affects their jobs, how it affects their day-to-day expenses, and so on. So I think this must be well explained to the public. It has to be curated in a way that the public would see that, okay, when the Prime Minister or when the government delegation goes abroad, then there's something in there for them. Also, when it comes to the topic of targeted subsidy, we also have to look at the recipients themselves. Basically, if you are talking about subsidizing B40 and neglecting M40 or T20 groups, we have to bear in mind that this group of people are also majority supporting PH and also the current government. So by not incentivizing or not providing enough assistance to these classes, you may lose political support, and it will weaken and dampen the spirit of the rakyat. So I think this is another issue that must be looked at. So from my point of view, an alternative that can be considered by the government is to effectively and efficiently communicate what would be the benefits of saving all this money and generating more revenue. So perhaps you need to pay more attention to social support programs. Maybe you need to think about incentives or initiatives related to educational support. You need to think about how to provide more upskilling opportunities for our young people, for women, whatnot. And also looking at the numbers, and also looking at the government blueprints. The government, not just this particular administration, but the past ones have launched our Malaysia plans. And if I'm not mistaken, the 12th Malaysia plan, it was noted that by 2025, we're supposed to have about 35% high-skilled workers. We're only at about 30% right now. So I think if the government can highlight some, coordinated, well-structured initiatives that can really go down to the people and try to basically highlight how the funding is being used, I think this will be appreciated by the masses, not just the B40, but the M40 and T20 groups as well.
Pari, can I add something on top of what Fadhil has mentioned?
Of course, go ahead.
I would want to our audience to conceptualize what Fadhil has mentioned. You imagine that whenever we, as an individual, from psychological point of view, whenever we are willing to buy a product, we know we are going to have to spend on it, and at the end you will still want to buy it because you believe that the benefit that you can get from that purchase outweighs the price that you just paid. So therefore you are willing to do so. Now you imagine that if you are the one who has to spend that money, and yet you are not the one who is going to enjoy the benefit of that spending, and that benefit of spending will be enjoyed by someone else, which you don't know, and you certainly will rebel. So that, because we always believe that who pays then who benefits from that services, who should pay for it. All right. So if you use that concept, you put into how we designed our subsidy reform, who will pay the price and who will gain from that reform, then we should obey this kind of rule as well. You imagine right now that it is mainly the M40 and the T20, for example, who are going to be, on the sacrifice side, on the pain side of this reform. Now, even though the governments will have a lot of this and that promises, just forget for a while about the implementation, whether they are going to be implemented or not. Just simply imagine that, having the government promise you that, we are going to use those, save money for hospitals, for education, which have nothing to do directly with those M40 and T20. And then you will realize that the pain is very straightforward, it's very real, but the gain is some sort of imagination. It is an imaginary gain, which at the end you may not be able to enjoy it at all. So that is exactly that mismatch of pains and gains, the distribution of pain and gains across different segments of the society that will make people, resist this kind of reform. So therefore, when it comes to the design of the reform on how to use that money saved from the fuel subsidy, for example, it's not just about implementation, but about who are going to enjoy or benefit from that savings. So I would propose that, so we shall have a proper match between the pains and the gains. Like, for example, I have to let go my RON 95 and go for RON 97. But what if I know that the money that I have to fork out, or the subsidies that I have to let go, in fact, will come back to me as some form of, let's say, for example, cash assistance for me to transit to EVs, for example, or if I am able to get subsidies from the government in order to install that charging, machines in my home, for example, then I would be more willing to let go my RON 95 subsidies, because I know that what I let go, I can get it back from somewhere else. And then you will notice that by doing so, then the rhetoric that the government should use when it comes to subsidy reform is not about distribution of wealth or income, but it's about other kind of reform that we want to go forward. Reform in energy transition. So we have this fuel subsidy reform because at the same time it is coherent with another reform the government is doing, energy transition, to have this 2050 net zero emission target, so on and so forth. So then the rhetoric will not go back to populism or more political, but more toward economic reason. And then, like I said, those who suffer from that reform will also be the one who gain later on. So with that, I believe that the resistance can be more minimized compared to what we are doing at this moment.
Dashni, I would like to add a bit to my
Please
comment
go on.
just now. Oh yes, thank you. Thank you, Prof. Wong, for the additional insight. I think it's well understood and makes it easier for the audience to understand. On my end, I just like to add a few points about the second part of Dashini's question just now about how the current rating of 55% affect Anwar's political support. So from our analysis and from our observations, not just in social media, but through interactions with key government stakeholders and operators on the ground, I think when we talk about Prime Minister Anwar's political rating, it's not just about subsidy, it's not just about SST expansion, it's not just about economic policy, it's not just about foreign policy, it's also about how everything is orchestrated politically as well. So I think over the past few months, we have been seeing some positive signs out of Anwar. The 55% rating was actually noted right after the ASEAN summit, in which Prime Minister Anwar was able to meet President Xi Jinping, a few other top leaders, and he was able to secure some investments from abroad. However, right after the period was over, right after we completed the survey at Merdeka Center, a few I would say episodes of crisis emerged, particularly within Prime Minister Anwar's own party. So he had this political issue and some lingering concern about Malaysia's ability to navigate through the tariff situation. And as of late, some governance-related matters such as the appointment of Chief Justice, as well as some economic elements. So I think when we talk about Anwar's political rating or overall public acceptance in going into the future, I think over the next few months, in my point of view, I think it will not be as smooth sailing as before. Perhaps there will be a bit of a dip, perhaps up to 5% or so. But we think that if he's able to come up with a better offering, say for example for the upcoming budget, and also for the upcoming Malaysia plan, the 13th Malaysia plan, and if he's able to resolve the current predicament on governance and manage, racial sentiments that has been popping up over the past few months, I think there will be some signs of hope, but I'm not too optimistic on that for now. I just keep it at that point.
Yeah. And don't read too much into that 55% because we're not having presidential election. This is parliamentary elections, and the popularity of the prime ministers is unlike the popularity of president. So two are different things.
Okay, that was a really wonderful discussion. Because of time constraint, we have to cut off all our other questions, and right now we'll be opening up the stage for the participants and the audience Q&A. So, right now, you could type participants, the audience could type the questions into the chat box, or you could unmute your mic and start asking questions to our fellow panelists. Is there any question right now? If there isn't, then I'll read out a few questions from the forms. There was one that was very suitable for the follow-up of the discussion. One of the participants asked that how can Malaysia justify failing to retain or attract its own highly skilled citizens, especially when the loss of nearly 2 million talents has already weakened our innovation base, academic integrity, and industrial competitiveness? Are our institutions too bureaucratically rigid or politically compromised to see that the cost of brain drain far outweighs any short-term fiscal savings from not investing in Malaysian talent? So who would like to go first?
Okay, let me go first. Now, okay, two facts. All right. Number one, if you look at the classification of the workers in Malaysia, the talents in Malaysia, as a matter of fact, about 1/3 of our workers are classified as skilled workers. Another about 60% are classified as semi-skilled. So skill and semi-skill combined account for more than 90% of our labor force. So those low skills are, they account for even less than 10%. So from that alone, let's say you want to read that statistics. So we are not lacking talents in a way. Okay, that's number one. We're not like in a crisis of, shortage of skill labels, but so we are not in that stage. So that's number one. Number two, the flows of workers labels are just like the flows of goods and services and the flows of capital. So you have capital, you have goods going out, you will have goods and capital coming in. Likewise, you have Malaysians talents moving out, you will have foreign talents coming in. So instead of reading alone that numbers of Malaysians going abroad, which if I believed, from individual point of view, if they find a better jobs with better pay from individual point of view, so that's something that they should do. But we should not read that numbers alone, but rather together with the number of talents, foreign talents coming over into Malaysia. So that's something that we should also bear in mind. Now, having said that, I believe that issues of talents moving out, or we always constantly in that kind of mood or environment, has something to do with the low salaries that we are suffering as well. So when we say low suffering, you can imagine that, like the stat I mentioned just now. By December last year, the median salary, monthly salary for workers is just 3,000. All right. So then you can imagine that, what kind of talents we can attract. So even if we talk about semi-skilled workers, it must be a low salary semi-skilled workers rather than a high pay semi-skilled or high pay skilled workers. So the issue is not about the numbers of skilled or semi-skilled. The issue is the low salary. Now, then we ask a question further. So what causes low salaries? Why salaries are so low? So we keep having that conversation recently, particularly for, we have prominent individuals talking about how low the starting salary for our graduates. Now, it the most the what do you call it, the often or the common go-to answer is the low productivity. It must be because our workers are very unproductive, so that's the reason. So the solutions will be on how this and that policy on how to improve the labor productivity. So I always say that this is just half of the answer. So another part of the answers lie in the companies in Malaysia. So why do I say that? You imagine that how the ability of our salaries come from companies. So the ability for companies paying the salary to our workers depends on two factors. Number one, of course, is our productivity. For every workers hired, how capable they are to produce goods and services. That's one part of the story. Another part of the story is even if we are very productive, produce many goods and services, but can those goods and services be put into the market, selling at good prices? By only able to do so with good prices, then the company will have good revenue for all those sales. So that good revenue only then will be trickled down to the labels as salaries. So the second part of the question is that what happened to the value added? What happened to the price of the products in the market? So that is something to do with the ability of the companies to put their products into the right market. So if you imagine that, like, we have about 2 million registered companies in Malaysia, but we have just like 2 to 3% of all these registered companies doing the exporting businesses. So you have like 98%, 97% of companies are all doing local businesses. How large is our local market? So that also means that majority of our companies, particularly the SMEs, are not in the exporting industries. They are all jammed into our local market. So therefore, you can't expect this kind of businesses jamming our very small local market to be able to sell the products at good prices and therefore being able to pay good salaries to our workers. Then we are therefore, keep stuck in this kind of loop. So it therefore involves on, when it comes to this keeping the talents, it's about how to not just like, to keep that talents. We always talk about how to make the salaries higher, right? To pay good salaries. So it's not just about how to train our workers to be a better workers, so on and so forth, but also on how to push our local companies, our SMEs to penetrate global market, not just our domestic markets, include both manufacturing and service SMEs. So therefore, that involves a lot of different kind of policies. It also involves a change in the preference of the government when it comes to investments. Because since independence, for so many decades, whenever we come to the stories about investments, we always talk about attracting foreign direct investments. All sort of incentives, grants, so on and so forth, they're all given tax exemption, for example, all given to the multinational companies, to those foreign direct investments. But spotlight has not been given sufficiently on how to promote our local companies to go abroad. So that will be something that I believe that we should do more in the future.
Thank you so much for the explanation.
I want to add maybe a
Yes,
couple of
definitely.
points to what Prof. Wong has put together just now. I think was very apt, very encapsulating regarding our labor market situation in Malaysia. I just like to highlight a few points here. First of all, being the breakdown of companies in Malaysia. I think as Prof. Wong noted just now, we have a lot of SMEs in Malaysia. Just to give a bit of context to everyone here, we have about 97% of all companies in Malaysia being SMEs. The rest, I think about 2-3% at most, large companies or MNCs. And yet, MNCs only contribute to about 40% of our GDP, which is definitely very low. So that's one point that we have to really highlight how our SMEs can grow and how they can actually bring in more revenue and eventually provide more competitive salaries to our graduates. That's one. The other point that I'd like to highlight is about the supply and demand situation here in Malaysia, because we are churning up graduates like crazy right now. Before this, universities, tertiary institutions used to be for the qualified ones, but right now we have too many private universities, private colleges giving out degrees in largely uncompetitive fields. So I think workforce planning is something that we have to integrate together with the higher education structure here in Malaysia. And at the same time, we need to have a bit of career planning and mapping initiative for our youngsters so that they would have specialized skills. The issue that we are having right now in Malaysia is that we have too many people having similar sets of skills, so it's not really marketable. And when it comes to supply and demand, we have too much supply, but restricted demand due to lack of competitive jobs here in Malaysia. So that's another point that we have to take into consideration. And my final point is the fact that even though we have excellent blueprints, excellent policies on industry development, whatnot, at the end of the day, if we only contribute about 1% of our GDP to R&D, research and development, we will be forever stuck in this cycle of being consumer-oriented or user-oriented market, and we will not be able to innovate and produce a lot of high income and big corporations that can actually retain and attract local talents to stay here in Malaysia.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fadhil. There's a question from the audience. Maybe Mr. Casey could take this. In light of the discussion thus far, what do you hope to see in Budget 2026?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, right? I think I really hope that having heard the public reaction to its recent fiscal policies in response to the OPR cut by Bank Negara and people's criticism on the implementation of expansion of SST, I think the government should really take heed of these feedback. And what I do hope to see in the upcoming budget is to do what is right, have moral courage, the political will to just do what is right. Bring back the GST. It is simply more efficient, effective, and transparent. And I feel that the more we try to beat around the bush, we're just ending up making lives a lot more complicated and difficult for everyone. And I would also like to say that, with this discussion about talent previously, we should also look back at just a little bit further, right, along this value chain of human capital. I mean, my colleagues here, Prof. Wong and Fadhil, were saying, it's about the jobs, the graduates down the line. But I feel like even at the point of tertiary education, we've actually lost a lot of talent when they don't even have sufficient opportunities to pursue tertiary education in competitive fields. So that's also something the government needs to look at, right? So I think we're quite excited to see what will be tabled in October. And speaking of which, since I'm the panelist here today, I have the mic. You cannot stop me unless you block me and mute me. INSAP is actually doing our consultation for Budget 2026 currently, and we want to welcome all of you to share with us your feedback and your wish list as we are compiling them into a memorandum to be submitted to the government. So you can get more details from our social media pages, or you can text me and I'll be happy to share with you links to our online questionnaire. Or if you want to meet face-to-face, we'll be at our office in Jalan Ampang in Wisma MCA on the 21st of July. We have an open day, and we want to welcome all of you to come and speak to us and share with us your views as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Casey. Mr. Fadhil, Prof. Wong, do you also have anything to share regarding the Budget 2026?
No, I don't.
I have a couple of points, not really on the actual content of the budget, but it's more about how the budget is presented and communicated to the public. I mean, this has been a regular occurrence every single year when we talk about budget. The expectation will be sky high, but eventually the discussion reaches a point of no return. Basically, you don't really know what's happening or what has happened to the budget in terms of dispensation, recipients, and so on. It's not really clear. So I hope the government can try to embark on an initiative to consistently communicate the recipients of certain programs, certain initiatives, certain projects. So we as rakyat would know what has happened to the funds allocated to each ministry or each project. That's one. And then talking about budget 2026, I would like to also bring your attention to the upcoming 13th Malaysia Plan that will be tabled in the next couple of weeks, I suppose. So I think this is an even grander opportunity for the government to outline its plans and uh, basically ideas over the next 4 to 5 years. And this will probably bring a bit of hope to the rakyat, especially in light of what's happening right now with geopolitical tensions coming in, and you have a lot of trade matters also affecting our economic direction here in Malaysia. So if the 13 Malaysia plan is well presented, has a lot of novel projects or initiatives that can directly benefit the rakyat in terms of infrastructure, in terms of social support, in terms of public service delivery, I think that will be well appreciated as well. So I think that's another area that we should try to discuss even more on top of the upcoming 2026 budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fadhil. I think Mr. Casey has listened to it and he'll be including your points as well. So right now, the next question from the participants would be that are there any sectors or subsidies in Malaysia that you believe are politically untouchable but economically efficient? Anyone could go first? Mr. Fadhil, maybe you could start.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Are there any sectors or subsidies in Malaysia that you believe are politically untouchable but economically efficient?
That's a tough one. Because I think when you talk about, maybe Mr. Woon, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think we have to address the role of subsidy in our economy, right? It has played such a big role in our consumption and our spending. So any sector, if it already has subsidy, removal of any subsidy will be problematic, right? I think generally people understand the cost of subsidy to the economy and to the government's coffers, but the how is very, very important. How do you rationalize that and taper it, our reliance on subsidy away from it? I think that is something that will need to be studied carefully. But if you want to pinpoint a sector, I would say any sector that currently enjoys subsidy will be a problem for any government to remove.
Yeah, I like to echo that as well because I think coming from INSAP, coming from MCA, I think we do understand the fact that any subsidy related decisions would be tied to eventual political outcome, meaning to say what will happen to your administration, to your party in the next election. So it's a very sensitive subject that you have to really tread the line, and perhaps you need to consider the possible implications. But then again, if you can have a strategic and effective communications plan, I think it will be somewhat acceptable for the public and especially for key stakeholders to understand the impact of withdrawing or reducing or targeting certain subsidies. Because I think the one thing that we don't really have in Malaysia is transparency. So as I noted several times earlier, even if the subsidies are cut, we don't really know where the money is going to. So if you can highlight success stories, feel-good stories about companies that can grow even after subsidy withdrawal, highlight key sectors that can emerge as victorious even after we have reduced, public assistance, I think that will be something that can be considered and hopefully accepted by the public, especially businesses.
I wanted to add on that. I think when we talk about subsidies, we probably have to differentiate the types of subsidies. What are the functions of those subsidies? It can be subsidies like the Raw 95 to ease their living cost burden, so and without distorting the supply, for example, in the market. You can have the price cap, and therefore you have to subsidize the producers because of the shortage in supply. So that kind of subsidies combined with the price cap will distort the market mechanism. So so you have issues of shortage, for example, and you have subsidies with the purpose to promote certain industries, certain productions, certain transition. For example, we want to move toward green energy, so that's why your subsidies on the purchase of EVs, for example. So each subsidies will have its function, and the subsidies that we want will be the one with positive externalities, positive spillover effects to the economy without distorting much the market mechanism. So that is the kind of subsidies that we want to keep, and those distort the market can be replaced by a better mechanism. Like, for example, you talk about the price cap of chickens, of eggs, and subsidies that follow with the price cap, so therefore will distort the market. So if you take away that price cap and therefore you take away the subsidies, so what happened to the market later? So then if let's say, for example, you have an issue about rising costs of because you remember in 3 years back, because of the Russian-Ukraine war, then you suddenly have the rising prices of those corns. That becomes the important cost for the farming industries, for the farm industry. So therefore, in that case, then you can have subsidies, for example, to ease this living costs or ease this cost of the importation costs, kind of subsidies, which is temporary without distorting the market, but just with the purpose of easing the cost for that period. So therefore, I would not say that from my perspective, when it comes to subsidies, I would not touch upon it from the perspective of political sensitive and economic efficiency. All sort of subsidies are economically inefficient, right? Because even without distorting the market, it distorts the behavior. But to distort the behavior sometimes is the purpose of the policy itself. So therefore, my point is it has to adhere several rules when we want to reform the subsidies. Number one, it didn't distort too much the market mechanism. Number two, it is there mainly with certain purpose, like, for example, like I say, to promote energy transition or to ease the living cost burden. So yeah, that will be how I view these subsidies issues.
That was a very interesting take. I think we can have a final question from the audience right now. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question? Okay, so I think I can ask a question from the form as well. So this question is regarding Malaysia's relationship in ASEAN. So with the Trump's era 25% tariff looming, how might Malaysia reposition itself within ASEAN? And how would the relationship with China or the regional friendshoring strategy help or hurt Malaysia long term? I think whoever would like to share on this could start off.
Let me start with the discussion.
Yeah, sure, of course.
All right. So two points here. Number one, from what happened when it comes to these tariff negotiations, for example, you have first Vietnam, then Indonesia. So you realize that when it comes to reality, no matter how much we talk about ASEAN unity, so each ASEAN members cared about its own countries, right? Each what you call the benefit of its own people, rather than from ASEAN perspective. We are not having a single voice like the case of EU when it comes to these kind of things. So that's the reality that we have to swallow. They have to encounter. But at the same time, it opens up a new possibility. What possibility is that? For too long, we view or treat ASEAN as a production hub. We talks about how large is this market, and then the fourth largest economy in the world, one of the youngest population. So this is where all these FDI should come to ASEAN to invest. So because of that, then each ASEAN members therefore, compete to attract those FDI. But the problem is that with these tariff issues, then you start to realize that what matters when it comes to the global value chains is the end user chain. Why US can be has such a large leverage on the whole trading system, even though it comes to the numbers itself. The US already accounted for less than 20% of the global trade. It's about like 16%, but still it has that large leverage power on the whole world trading system because it holds the choke points of the whole global value chains, which US occupies the end user chain, which is US still offer the world the single largest consumer market in the world. So it is the consumer market, it is end user market that matters when it comes to these value chains or supply chain issues. So no matter how we diversify within ASEAN, for example, as long as our final products still rely on external market, which is the case of ASEAN, because intra-ASEAN trade accounts for less than 25% of our trading among each other. It's about like 23%. Unlike the case in EU, for example, trade among themselves for the final goods can range from 50 to 80% for each EU members. So because of that, therefore, no matter how you diversify within ASEAN, as long as you portray ASEAN or you position ASEAN still as a production hub, rather than an integrated single end user market, then we will never be able to escape from this kind of problems again in the futures, where we are always constantly being the subject of threat from those superpowers, whether it's from US or from China. So therefore, it opens up an opportunity on how ASEAN should think about the way in the future, for example, to synchronize, to standardize our regulatory framework within ASEAN, so that you have a somewhat single market within this ASEAN. So then that single market, end user market, opens up many opportunities for ASEAN companies, for example, to produce and to penetrate our own market. So that market itself can support the emergence of many unicorns and many big companies. And only by, like I said, controlling that choke points within ourselves, then we have a more power when it comes to this global trade. So that's one. Number two, and how do we think about that relationship between US and China? So you see, we used to have, in the past 2 years, we basically enjoyed the dividend from the US-China friction. It is exactly because of the friction between US and China since 2018 that opens up a fissure that allows country like Malaysia to grow out of that fissure. When you talk about all these FDI in data center, in other IT industries, the reason why they want to reposition their production facilities in Malaysia, it's because of the friendshoring, like Tyree just mentioned. If it is not safe to have that factories in China, so why not in the neighboring country? So Malaysia certainly offer a good option. But following what probably is going on recently between China and the United States, then you should start to worry about our FDI performance in years to come. Why? Because US and China just strike a framework where the China will just ease the restriction of the rare earth exports, to the United States. At the same time, US now allows advanced AI chips to be exported to China. All right, so that NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, who now in China, just made that announcement. So that means that kind of clash, which we used to believe that tariffs is about US against China, that kind of rhetoric probably will change again. So that again will reshape how FDI flows within this region, certainly Malaysia. Those who initially think of investing in Malaysia because of that clash, now they probably will think twice, so they probably now want to maintain. Going back to China, if I can get all those AI chips in China, why we come to Malaysia? So then that's how I mean, that's what small countries like always will have to face. But at least we should have that kind of, we should also reorient our mindset when it comes to this superpowers game. One last point. We talk about, if not United States, then why not we make friends with China, rely more on China? It seems to be more reliable trading partners. But don't forget that China is a very different superpower compared to United States. If United States superpower is to occupy the end user chain in the global value chain, then China is the one occupied the upper chain in these global value chains, where they are the one who needs global market to export their products, to export their surpluses. So that is a completely different superpower they are facing. If in the past six decades, for example, we are able to tap on US market for our exports, for our economic growth, then if really that power shift to China, then it is a different superpower they are going to face. It is unlike the US, where we are able to export whatever goods we want to China, because there are a lot of non-tariff barriers right there in Chinese market. So yeah, that's a completely different story.
Thank you so much for that very, very insightful answer, Prof. Wong. Does Mr. Casey or Mr. Fadhil want to add on? No?
I think Prof. Wong has covered it in detail. If there are any other questions, we'd be happy to tackle.
It's already 10, but there's a question from one of our participants. I think we could end it with that final question. So Alam Neldo asked that by the Trump 25% tariff effect, what is the expected unemployment rate and what kind of industry is involved in this case? Mr. Casey or Mr. Fadhil, would you want to share your take on it?
I think what we need to understand, right, would be what is the impact of so-called reciprocal tariffs from Trump on the Malaysian industry. As we were discussing earlier, the imposition of tariffs are actually going to be paid by US consumers. So what it means is when you impose a tariff on Malaysian products that we export to the US, for example, electronics, rubber-based products, furniture, it makes our products more expensive in the US by 20%, 25%, 30%, 35%, whatever the numbers are. And what does this mean? It means that the consumers there may decide to purchase other brands or other products that are cheaper compared to higher priced Malaysian products. And judging by how many countries are being taxed or tariffed by the US, seems going to be everyone else is going to be more expensive other than products produced domestically within the US. So what does it mean for Malaysia, right? For the Malaysian sectors who are reliant on, who are exporting to the US, be it electronics, furniture, or rubber-based products, the market is very big for these things. So what are we doing in terms of helping these industries to break into new markets, into new sectors, to find new customers and reduce our reliance? And I think businesses generally understand the risk of single source or concentration risk of putting all your eggs in one basket. So what are its impact on unemployment? I don't think anyone could put a number to that. Anyone who would try would probably rely on a lot of estimations and assumptions, which I don't think we're in a position to do, right? Unless we know the actual mechanics of this supply chain. So that's probably something that's worth studying as we observe, monitor, and study the impact of the tariffs. But for now, I think with that basic understanding of how the tariffs will apply to our sectors, I think it's more important for us to focus our effort on helping our industries diversify their market.
Thank you so much for the answer, Mr. Casey. Mr. Fadhil, do you want to add something on?
Maybe I just add a point, maybe related to this question and the previous one. So I think when it comes to unemployment rate, it's quite difficult for us to pin the tariff as the primary factor influencing unemployment rate in Malaysia because there are various internal factors as well that we mentioned just now about, uh, performance of companies, their ability to scale up, innovation, and so on. So there are other factors that are coming into play as well. But talking about Malaysia and its position in ASEAN, just a quick point from my end. I think the other good thing that we have been doing under the current administration is the fact that we have been diversifying a lot in terms of market and in terms of our diplomatic relations, in terms of strengthening our diplomatic relations. So just now it was mentioned there was a mention about US, China, and ASEAN. But I think if you look at the trajectory of Malaysian trade and also partnerships with countries in the past few months, we have been noticing increasing presence and engagements with stakeholders from other parts of the world as well, which I think is very encouraging. The Prime Minister himself has stated about Malaysia's idea of strengthening global south and of course the continents within this particular region that includes Africa, Middle East, and Latin America, among others. So I think this is another point that we should really consider in discussing Malaysia's position in the world. And also when it comes to ASEAN trade, I think we can also try to number one, look at what we can continue to do as a country in Malaysia, but as a bloc in ASEAN, I think maybe we can try to have a more robust exchange with other parts of the world as well, especially in the global south, as we talk about market diversification and product diversification. So I think this is another way to go when it comes to, exploring new territories for our market improvement and economic growth in the particular region.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fadhil, for adding that on. So I think since it's coming to an end, we can wrap up the session right now. And also, thank you so much for our fellow panelists for agreeing to be in this interview. We had a really great session. A lot of information was passed, a lot of knowledge was gained, and I in particular was really, really inspired by a lot of things that was said here. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to moderate and also be a part of this session. Thank you so much for attending this, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And right now, HEYA also would like to advertise a bit of their event, which is the RTD session. The RTD session would be on Budget 2026, which is similar to what Mr. Casey mentioned just now. It's on 22nd August, and we'll be discussing on we'll be having a roundtable discussion with where you can directly engage with the policymakers and fellow stakeholders. This is a event which HEYA Inc. is organizing with ASLI, and it's called Budget 2026 Navigating Economy Madani. It's a very short event, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And if you're interested, you can simply scan the QR code to learn more or register. And please stay tuned to our social media. We also will be talking about how the current economy Madani policies are working in practice, and we'll be developing concrete recommendations for Budget 2026 that will be addressing the challenges we are facing. And hopefully we'll be creating meaningful dialogue between the policymakers and society to ensure that our voices are heard during this budget process. So whoever is interested, please join this event, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you there. And again, thank you so much for attending this event. Thank you so much for our fellow panelists for staying till the end and accepting our invitation. I really hope the participants also gain a lot of knowledge just like me. And that's all. Hope you have a great night and also the great weekend. Thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night. See you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fadhil, for making it despite the constrained time.